including lots of different perspectives about charity work with his charity Committed, which is based in Nepal, with his ideas about freedom of expression and free education for all and human rights and what that means. So that all themes that will link into your GTS and your ethics part of your GFK as well. So please pick up some really interesting real-life examples today from Mr. Grant.
Hold on. Just a second. Okay. Year 12, right? Yeah. Okay. 12s and 13s. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Right. Wow. That's good. I used to be a teacher myself, but I stopped teaching about 2 years ago. And I've started speaking at schools, and I'm realizing how much I miss being in front of students, like yourselves. Yes. That's why I'm doing this, to get back into the school. Right. Let me just begin. You know, I might as well just start, right? I was going to give you a little bit of, and I think we don't have a whole lot of time, so, okay. Right. I wasn't born into privilege. The circumstances and the context of my birth in Nepal meant that considerable odds were stacked against me. That they may even be insurmountable. While I suffered considerably in my life due to the circumstances and the context of my birth, they did not determine my destiny. I was able to achieve my dreams. My dreams did take flight. I achieved considerable professional and personal success. And I credit that success, firstly, to the privilege of education, both formal and informal, and secondly, to humanity. Education and humanity made all the difference to my life. That discovery and pursuit of my dreams has led me back to Nepal after spending most of the last 26 years. Pretty much all of my adult life abroad. It's precisely because of that, because I've suffered and owe my success to humanity, that I've returned to Nepal to provide the kind of privilege to the next generation of Nepalese children born into the kind of context and background I was born into. This presentation is all about the role humanity played in my dreams taking flight and why and how I believe humanity will save itself, just as it did me. The small area in that blue circle is where I'm from. And I'm sure you know Nepal, right? It's between China and India. Small country, sandwiched between two giants. And that little place is called Mustang. And it's north of the mountains, the Himalayas. And my village, Tangbe, is within that circle. As a child, I lived in this village with my grandparents. We had no indoor plumbing, no running water, no refrigerators, no telephone. Forget about smartphones. I bet some of you can't even remember a time when there was no smartphones. As a people, coming from northern Nepal, we're Tibeto-Nepalese. And we practice a religion called Tibetan Buddhism, which is a mix of the local religion of Bon and Buddhism. We speak a language called Seke, a language that's quite limited. We don't even have a script. It's only spoken. And as of now, there are apparently only about 200 people who speak it regularly. So it's one of those languages in the list of endangered, it's one of those endangered languages now because of that. Birth as a Tibeto-Nepalese in Nepal meant that I was considered a low caste. Do you all know the caste system in Nepal? Like in India, it's similar. So born a low caste into a poor family meant that not much was expected of me. I wasn't expected to make much of my life. As a matter of fact, I wasn't even expected to go to school. While I lived in the village with my grandfather, and there it is, a shot of the village. There's only about 35 houses in there. While I lived in the village with my grandparents, my parents lived in the cities, in a small city called Pokhara. Beautiful city called Pokhara. My parents wanted me to go to school. So after repeated requests from my father, my grandfather finally took me to the city. The living conditions there, not much different. No indoor plumbing, none of the basic amenities that you enjoy, we all enjoy nowadays. When I arrived in Pokhara, we were 5 of us in a little room and 1 bed. After a couple of moves, we ended up in a 2-room living arrangement. But by then, we were 7 of us in our family. And sometimes we'd be 10, 11, 8, 9, when we'd have relatives visiting and staying with us, cousins living with us. And I was attending government schools at the time. My parents, my grandparents, none of my relatives had any history of education. And with movement of residents, I moved school. And I ended up at this school called Bal Jyoti in Pokhara. And it was there, a teacher at this 3rd school was the first person that I credit with starting me on this incredible journey of education and discovery about the world and humanity. Realizing that I had potential, this teacher of mine, the story goes, this teacher of mine went to my dad, took my dad aside and told him, "Your son has potential. But if you leave him here, nothing will become of that. Take him to Kathmandu and put him in a good private school." My dad had no idea about education, but heeding his advice, he took me to Kathmandu. And to make a long story short, I ended up at a school called St. Xavier's, a boarding school, a Jesuit boarding school, just outside of Kathmandu. There, I was inspired and encouraged by teachers to dream. They also provided me with the drive to imagine a world, life, and a life different from home. One such teacher was Father Downing from Cincinnati, Ohio. Apart from regaling us with stories of what the U.S. was like and so on and so forth, he would bring visitors to the school to speak to us, just like I'm speaking to you. And these visitors were graduates of our school who had gone to the U.S. to study, who had already either graduated or had come home for break. As a result, when I was in 5th grade, I dreamt of going to the U.S. for further studies and ultimately of returning home to help children from background similar to mine. David Beeston, another North American teacher, for instance, when I was in high school, describing how winter in Kathmandu is different from that in his hometown of Winnipeg in Canada, said something which I never forgot, which I still remember. And he said, and I quote, "In winter in Winnipeg, when you look out the window, all you see is white. Everywhere." Growing up, of course, in Nepal, surrounded by green hills and mountains really far off to the distance, I was, of course, totally and completely intrigued. The other drive was to be the first person from my village to get qualifications from institutions abroad. However, coming from a poor family, there was pressure to quit. There was constant pressure to quit school and support the family financially. Since I was the firstborn and I had 4 younger brothers, that, according to tradition, is one of the responsibilities that falls on a firstborn. Furthermore, because of the low socioeconomic background I came from, I became the first. Because it came from the lack of societal belief in me, the expectation, rather, that I wouldn't make anything of me, was continuously reinforced. And of course, that was also a little draining. But stay in school, I did. And when I completed high school, I became the first one from my entire extended family to do so. A family of 5 brothers and over 3 dozen first cousins, many of whom were older than me. Then in 1988, the next lifeline appeared. A full scholarship to the United World College of Adriatic in Italy. One of the number of things I recall about my experience at the UWC, one which always gives me a warm feeling in my heart, is the way my friends and their families took care of me and made me feel special during vacations when I couldn't afford to fly home. My friends would invite me home to stay with their families. Not only that, over Christmas break, these families would buy me presents just as they did their own children. An Italian family that I was staying with not only bought presents for me, they also bought a gift to give to a very good friend of mine on her birthday from me. During those 2 years, I was on the receiving end of incredible generosities and kindness. Also, during those years, I met and befriended fellow students from all over the world, which shrank my world. Living in Italy and traveling a bit in the neighboring countries I also got a glimpse into the natural beauty of our planet. I got a glimpse into the world I'd only read about in the books that I devoured during my school career in Nepal. And it was during those years that I came to believe that we humans of different nationalities and different cultures and practicing different religions had more commonalities than differences. Humanity, I learned, I felt, I discovered, tied us all together. Towards the end of my UWC experience, I finally realized my childhood dream of going to the US. The scholarship I had been dreaming about since 5th grade came the spring of 1990, taking me to Grinnell, Iowa. A very liberal 4-year college, both socially and academically. At Grinnell, between 1990 and 1994, again, I met some amazing people, and I was on the receiving end of a great deal of kindness and generosity. Graduating from Grinnell, I became the first person from my village, and maybe even the whole of Upper Mustang, the district I'm from, to get tertiary qualification from an educational institution abroad. Approaching graduation, I knew I wanted what I wanted to. I knew what I wanted to do. And it wasn't to return to Nepal. Not immediately, anyway. The spring of '94, my last semester at Grinnell, one late afternoon, watching the late afternoon sky turning different hues every several seconds, my friend Aubrey had asked, "So, what do you want to do?" I remember clearly telling her, "I want to go see the world." But the trouble was, I had no idea how. But as luck would have it, my former chemistry teacher at the United World College of Adriatic invited me back to the college. I jumped at the opportunity, and that is what put me on a career of teaching, traveling, and exploring the world. For most of the 20 years between 1994 and 2014, I pursued a fantastical international teaching career spanning 10 different countries, from the United States in the west to Vietnam in the east, from Norway in the north to Malawi in southern Africa, and countries like Azerbaijan, Hong Kong. I spent a year here. I worked at the UWC in Mao and Shan, and the United Kingdom in between, expanding my network of friends and people around the world. Still, by the time I approached the end of my teaching career, I'd traveled to about 36 countries, and my network of friends spanned the world. I'd seen and done some amazing things in this incredible world of ours, and learned a great deal about it. I'd trekked to an altitude of 5,500 meters in Nepal. I'd scuba dived to the depth of 31 meters in the Philippines. I'd swum with wild dolphins off the coast of Zanzibar. I'd skied in the Swiss Alps, snow camped in Norway, hiked in the Dolomites in Italy, had gone hot air ballooning in Australia. You might not be able to tell, but that's me there. That one there. And I'd gone on wildlife safaris in Nepal, in Zambia, and the Ngorongoro, the awesome, the amazing Ngorongoro crater, and the incomparable Serengeti plains. What you see on television screen is nothing. Nothing like what it is like in the Serengeti plains. I'm sure you've watched National Geographic. Right? And I'd learned to play the didgeridoo. I'd learned to play ultimate frisbee. And I'd learned to dance salsa, merengue. All the while, of course, I'd been planning to return to Nepal to fulfill my original dream. The only question had been, when? In preparation for the eventual return, ever since leaving for the first time in 1988, I'd been visiting Nepal almost every single year, once on average, once a year on average. During those visits to Nepal, I would make every effort to visit my hometown, Pokhara, and also my village, Tangbe, in Mustang. In Pokhara, I would visit the streets we'd lived in, and would also make every effort to visit the schools, the government schools that I had attended. Going back often was the only way to keep myself from losing my way back to the beginning, to where my life's adventure had begun. In the meantime, the educational opportunities I'd had, the professional experience I had, the travel opportunities, what I had experienced, what I did, what I saw, what I had been given and rewarded with by people I had studied, taught, worked, and traveled with. All of those privileges I had, they had all been beyond the wildest imagination of the 1981 fifth grade school kid in Kathmandu, Nepal, dreaming of going abroad for studies and making something of himself. Not surprisingly, therefore, even as I was doing everything I felt I needed to maintain my connection to where I came from, those experiences would transform me into a person I hadn't imagined then. One of the important transformations was that of thinking of myself as a human being first, and then everything else. All aspects of my identity, ethnicity, nationality came next. Countries and nationalities stopped meaning much, especially since I had friends spanning the world. Those countries represented more faces and people and humanity than political and geographical entities. The other result of having the privilege of getting formal education in 5 different countries, working in 10 different countries, spanning 5 continents, and traveling to another 30 or so, the other result of those experiences was drawing certain conclusions about life and the world we live in. Here's one of the first ones. At the core of that is the confirmation I felt I got for my belief in compassion, a Buddhist belief. However, having been born a Buddhist in a Hindu kingdom and having grown up attending a Jesuit school in Nepal, having gotten a high school diploma in Italy, a Catholic country, and worked in 2 Islamic countries, etc., I've also realized the following about beliefs. one could make one's life meaningful by living according to a certain set of beliefs, but not insist that others also believe them and live by them. Having been born into a low socioeconomic background in Nepal and everything else that followed, the following is also abundantly clear to me now. And those core values are none other than kindness, generosity, and compassion. In other words, humanity. That which I came across all through my life. That which I was a beneficiary of pretty much all my life. What I also came to realize, having experienced poverty and having seen this all over the world, having seen poverty all over the world, everywhere, is this. Incidentally, those are all my own photos. I encountered this porter on a trek to my village along part of the Annapurna circuit, a very, very popular trekking route for tourists in Nepal. And this was way back in the spring of 2000. The man's load was so heavy that he took maybe a step every 2 seconds. But because he was so poor and was paid so little, he carried his own food and cooking utensils to save as much as he could. The poorest and some of the hardest working people on this planet have the hardest time even putting a meal, a decent single meal, on the table for themselves and their children. And yet, these very people, the weakest and the most vulnerable, the poor, the marginalized, and their children, are often treated the worst. But I've believed the following for a long time. Some of the weakest and the most vulnerable in Nepal are the children of poor families, children of Dalits, the untouchables, the lowest of the low castes, children of marginalized groups such as Tamangs and Tharus, especially girls. So, in March 2013, I finally decided to return home for good. I started blogging about my plans. Except, I would take a detour. On May 1st, 2013, I'd be thrown in jail for allegedly insulting Islam following a minor incident in the cafeteria with a few students at Qatar Academy in Doha, Qatar, where I was working at the time. And once again, people came to my rescue. classmates and schoolmates from St. Xavier's in Nepal and abroad, classmates, schoolmates, and teachers from the United World College of the Adriatic, spread all over the world, classmates, college mates, and personnel from Grinnell College, colleagues from Qatar Academy itself, former colleagues and friends from when I worked in other UWCs and other countries like Azerbaijan, United States, Malawi, etc. Former students from various UWCs such as the Red Cross Nordic UWC and other schools I taught at around the globe also came to my rescue. They mobilized themselves and their friends to get me out of prison, to right the injustice that had visited me. Thousands who had no personal relationship to me joined the campaign in calling for a due process or my release on grounds of human rights and justice. Within 4 days of initiating the campaign, I was released and I returned home on May 13, 2013. If you're North American, 13 is an unlucky number, by the way. Proved to be lucky for me. The reason behind my victimization, once again, had to do with the circumstance of my birth, being a Nepalese. The 20-month experience in Qatar in general, and the 12 days in jail in particular, what was yet another lesson in pain, suffering, and redemption by humanity. What I experienced during those days in jail, you will most likely not be able to relate to, nor understand. I don't mean that you're not intelligent, nor am I trying to be patronizing. As a matter of fact, I hope you never in your life get to a point where you're able to relate to or understand experiences such as that. If you do, then what that will unfortunately mean is that you have suffered too. Having already reached bottom during my time at Qatar Academy, emotionally and psychologically, long before the incarceration, when the ordeal had begun the afternoon of May 1st, with a huge metal door to my private cell, closing with a loud bang and shutting me inside, a cold and wet room. I had the feeling that the bottom had been pulled from under me, so to speak. Such despair no one should have to face. But there were others in jail as well as outside in Qatar and elsewhere, other Nepalese, other Asians, who had lost everything and as a result lived and continued to live with such despair every single day. And what's more, in Nepal and many other countries I've lived and traveled to, there are hundreds of thousands who live in despair every single day. In Nepal, there are families of migrant laborers, poor families and their children, families and their children belonging to low castes, etc. Since returning home on May 13, 2013, I have been doing what I can to give back to humanity that gave me so much. Working with schools catering to children from low socioeconomic background. I'm doing everything I can through Committed, the organization I run with my childhood buddy, Jaijeev Hada, and at times also independently on the side. Committed helps government schools, government and community schools, schools where children from low socioeconomic backgrounds attend, schools similar to the ones I started my own academic career at, to ensure that they have a shot at a better life than their parents. Our main project site is the little village of Thangpalkot in Sindhu Palchok district, adjoining Kathmandu. No different from the rest of the district, Thangpalkot is mostly inhabited by the marginalized group of Nepalese people called Tamang. In addition to suffering from discrimination because of their lower status in the caste system, the Tamangs are also some of the poorest in the country. The district of Sindhu Palchok also has the dubious distinction of being the district where girl child trafficking to India began. Committed assists schools in the village with resources and infrastructure. But the most important project is that of setting up a fishery, what we call a social business for education, to generate income for the school so that it is self-sustainable. In addition to that, on the side, I'm also heavily involved in the United World College movement. As a former student of the United World College of the Adriatic and former teacher of 4 other UWCs, I'm intimately aware of the life-transforming experience a UWC experience provides. As a member of the selection committee, I'm involved in the selection of the next generation of Nepalese youngsters, concentrating my efforts into encouraging children from low socioeconomic backgrounds to apply and doing whatever I can to ensure children from such background get to the UWCs. For instance, last year, the candidate we selected, Iju, came from a family that couldn't afford the $2,500 or so in personal expenses. I fundraised the amount from my network of friends around the world, and we were able to send Iju on her adventure. She is currently a first-year student at UWC Maastricht in Holland. That brings me to why I do what I do, why I do the kind of work I do in Nepal. I do them for 2 reasons. Firstly, to ensure that those children realize their dreams and have, if even on a small scale, the kind of incredible life I've had, namely to see the world and learn about this marvelous world we live in and the people we share it with. And secondly, and more importantly, to ensure that they do not experience the suffering, the pain, and the despair that I have experienced, which they invariably will, especially little girls and Dalit children, if no one does anything about their situation. I believe in international understanding, a phrase I was introduced to during my years at the UWC. International understanding to me is nothing other than seeing the world through others' eyes, empathizing with others, being kind, being generous, being benevolent, being compassionate. In other words, displaying humanity. What's more, I believe our feelings for fellow human beings, our compassion and empathy for fellow human beings, and our ability to see ourselves in the shoes of fellow human beings will contribute to making the world a better place, a more peaceful place, a goal of United World College education. Having been on the receiving end of the incredible degree of humanity from people everywhere, from teachers, from when I was a student at Baljyoti School in Pokhara, all the way to Grinnell College in the US, from others in Nepal and abroad, when I was a student as well as when I was a teacher, from having had the opportunity to transform my life into something that was way beyond the wildest imagination of the young Dorje of Nepal, I believe humanity is the only thing that will save humanity itself. And you, all of you gathered here today, you who have opportunities that a large number of children around the world don't and probably won't have, the network of friends you've established and will continue to expand on in the years to come, will give you a power that most people won't have. How you'll use that power, how you use that power, will be entirely up to you. My hope is that you will use it to make your life meaningful, just as I've tried and continue to try to do. Thank you. Right. Questions? I don't know if I can.